So as this COVID situation moves on, I've done less in the podcast and been focusing on more in other areas of life. But a while back, we got the news of the passing of Eddie Van Halen. I knew at that moment that I needed to do a podcast. It was something that I knew I wanted to do, but I had to wait until the dust settled. And I actually recorded this podcast before. I'd done a different version, but I'm re-recording and doing some different things and taking on a different perspective from the first podcast that I'd done. Because initially I didn't put this intro in there. I just went kind of straight into the podcast and start talking about things. But my intent of the podcast is to talk about Eddie Van Halen, what he meant to me, how I got to know him, and how he influenced me, and just the whole progression of knowing him. Because growing up at such a young age and learning how to play guitar, he was one of my main influences and kind of shaped the way I looked at guitar. He shaped the way I looked at writing some music. And as far as the expression and the freedom to move about the guitar and create things like I wanted to create them, and not be embarrassed about that I was doing the wrong thing, and worried about doing the right thing or what was cool. And as we know, Eddie was the type of guy that he was more or less, he was private about some things he kept hidden, some things he didn't reveal to the public. And a lot of times there was a mystery about the things that he was doing, what gear he was using, if he was modding his amps. There's a lot of history that goes into that. But that's one of the things that a lot of us guitar players focus on is, not just the playing, it's the equipment. He's building his guitars. He's switching up using different types of Floyd Roses. Is he using a boogie body? Is he using Kramer guitars, Kramer bodies? The journey was never ending for him. He was always chasing tone. He was always creating not only the music, but he was creating the instruments. And, he was a keyboard player, because before I picked up the guitar, I was playing a lot of keyboards. And that's kind of the way I want to start this podcast off, is just talking about 1984. As we know, 1984, I think it was the Oberheim keyboard that Eddie Van Halen was using, and he really wanted to incorporate it into some songs. And there was some, I guess, some difficulty between him and Roth about the direction of the band going between the Diver Down and the 1984 album. So we hear that keyboard on 1984, the intro of the album. It's very bold. It's very upfront. It makes a statement that, hey, I'm playing keyboards, and that's the way we're opening up the album. Because when they recorded this album, 1984, it was in 5150 Studios. It was when Eddie had built the studio, and while they were getting ready to putting all the stuff in the studio, he's really experimenting with a lot of keyboards. As we hear in a couple of other songs, I'll Wait song is one of their releases off the album. You hear the keyboard on that song, and the infamous song Jump. I mean, if you don't know that song, you totally missed out on something special. But my first introduction really to seeing Eddie Van Halen, I heard the music before, but seeing them is a whole lot different than hearing the songs on the radio. When I saw the video Jump, I saw Eddie and the way he moves and how much fun he was having. And I also got to see him do his tapping on the guitar, which I hadn't seen before or really seen anybody else do. And when I first saw him tapping the way he done, I actually thought he was using his picking hand and using the thumb to pick the string and using all three fingers to do the tapping. I can't talk. But that's the way I thought he was doing it from just watching the videos. Because at this time, I was just now kind of seeing videos on television due to soundtracks and movies, and we had I think night tracks coming up on WTBS or, or whatever station it was, and that came after Friday night videos. So the music video was starting to get popular, and that's where I seen a lot of these guys, playing their guitars. They weren't actually playing in their videos, but you kind of got an idea of how they were handling their guitar and how they were playing different things. So it's one thing as a guitar player to watch, and it was just those taps, trying to get that down and try to pick apart what he's doing. Also around this time, he played the solo and Beat It. Michael Jackson, he jumped over from his studio, went over to Quincy Jones and rearranged the song and put it all down. And those two solos are really similar into where they're played and the taps and the selection of notes that he used. So there was a good correlation between those two that I picked up on, and some things that I tried to incorporate in my playing. I was nowhere near the proficiency as he was at that time because I just picked up the guitar, but it was something for me, an area for me to get started in. And also I remember seeing the Jump video. I remember seeing the Panama video, and Panama the video blew me away because of this right here. Now seeing that video and seeing him on stage playing the guitar, and he was playing that stuff low on the neck, and I'm thinking, man, I've got to be doing something wrong, or either maybe he's not playing it on the video the way it's actually supposed to be played. So it was something that I really tried to figure out. And this is kind of like Billy Idol's Rebel Yell and Steve Stevens when he uses the ray gun. There's a couple of you meet up with those songs that you just can't understand what they're doing because you can't see them in the studio and actually know what they're doing. So it's like a matter of trial and error to get that right. And I went to this part of my brain trying to recreate that over and over, and I was just blown away by it. And I would watch it over and over again, and I would play it over and over again, trying to get that down. If it wasn't even in the right notes, I was just trying to get that sound. I've tried, several ways to get the sound before I realized, how to touch the string right to get one of those natural harmonics. To me, it just sounded like a machine and metal scrapings just going everywhere, because I'd never heard anything like that before at the time. But 1984, that's why I chose to start right here. It's I think 1984 and 5150 are two of the best albums. I mean, you have David Lee Roth backed up by Sammy Hagar, 1984 and 5150 right there. A couple of other things about 1984. It was when they took the songwriting credits away from Michael Anthony. It's also another fact is Michael McDonald. I think he helped Eddie write the intro to "I'll Wait," so they kind of a little bit of collaboration going on right there. But 1984 is it's one of those revolutionary years for a lot of different things going on in music. But hearing that album and getting to know Eddie Van Halen through the videos, and it made me go on a hunt to get the rest of their albums, because I was pretty young at the time and I didn't have a lot of money to go out and just buy cassette tapes, because that's what we had at the time. And some of the cassettes were as high as $11 and $15. And if you know the era that the cassettes were being made in, you knew that was an expensive price. And today you don't really see cassettes. So it was something I had to save up money to go back and buy these tapes, these cassette tapes, and go back deeper into the Van Halen catalog and get caught up. I had heard Eruption off of Van Halen 1. I'd heard Running with the Devil, You Really Got Me. I'd heard those songs, but I never had to sit down, had the chance to like sit down and just like pick them apart and try and play them on guitar. So the best place for me to start as a guitar player was go to the different markets. I can't remember what stores we had at that time, and source out these albums to see where the cheapest one I could buy, because I knew they were older albums, so I knew there had to be some deals out there to get these things for $5.99 or $7.99. So that's what I set out to do. And I went out, I think I bought Van Halen 1 and 2 at the same time. I can't exactly remember. I know I started with Van Halen 1, and I put that tape on, and Running with the Devil, you know, it kicks up. You know, it was a decent song to kick it off, but my bread and butter was, my goal was to get to Eruption. I listened to the whole tape front and back before I went back to my favorite Eruption there. Just a little over a minute when I'm the infamous solo by Eddie Van Halen. I listened to a YouTube video not too long ago about the recording of Eruption, and I believe it was recorded in the Sunset Studios, and they mic'd up Eddie's amp with just a couple of microphones. And they had heard some things that he had done just kind of warming up in the studio, and part of it was Eruption, and I think he told them it was something they kind of done during their shows, during their live shows and previous performances, just something to kind of fill the gap and, you know, to show off a little. So they used Eruption as like an intro to Really Got Me. You Really Got Me, because when you listen to the album, they go from straight off Eruption into You've Really Got Me. And you hear it on the tape, there's connected together, and that's the way they recorded it into the studio. When they done these sessions for Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2, I think they recorded up to somewhere around 40 or 45 songs or something like that, all in that studio, and they had a lot of music. And these were live sessions that they done. You know, that all the members of the band were playing. They would record them as they go, because we know as they record music now, they really like to layer tracks one on top of each other, double, triple guitars, and, you know, octave down guitars, tuned down guitars. A lot of things they'll do now to fatten sound up. But this was like 2 microphones off of his amp and some room mics, you know, drums, bass. They went back and done little fillers, little overdubs in different places when they needed to. But they would do the songs repetitively over and over until they got the best take. And they would take those and use them on the album after they had the mixes done. So the whole process of recording is totally different. This was 1978 when they recorded Van Halen 1. You've got Ain't Talking About Love after that. And you've got a song called I'm the One that finishes up the A side. I'm the One is another song I really enjoy playing just because of the speed of it, the quickness of the fingers. It was probably one of the easier songs that I picked up on to play, and you know, learn a whole lot about it, hitting those natural harmonics and whammy bar usage. And flip the tape over, you get Jamie's Crying. If you've listened to rap music, you know Tone Loc. You've heard parts of Jamie's Crying because they sampled that song. Also, you have Atomic Punk, which is it's Phase 90. And when I first heard that song, it was kind of natural. I knew what they could do on the guitar to create the sound. It was pretty straightforward. I knew there was an effect on there, but I knew how to initially make the sound. You know, this is where I'm cutting my teeth in guitar, and I'm learning to use my ear and learning to use my hands on the guitar in different ways to create the noises that I want to make, or replicate the things that I want to make. You go into Ice Cream Man, they end up the album with On Fire, which is it's a cool song in itself, a good way to end the album on a high note. And so I'll move on. Van Halen 2, 1979. Now these albums are coming out every year for Van Halen, so they've got the songs recorded. They just have to put them on the album and release them. So you get Van Halen 2, and something that was on Van Halen 2 album is similar to the way they done Van Halen 1, except you get the Eddie Van Halen in his solo spot, and this time it's Spanish Fly. Spanish Fly is done on an acoustic guitar, so the volume is a little bit low on it, but the playing is finessed. It's a lot of tapping, it's a lot of stretches that had to play. It's a lot of rewinding of the tape to figure stuff out. This is a time that I was reading tablatures in guitar magazines, trying to figure out how to play different things. And with the reading the music and getting the tablature to certain songs helped me develop more of my ear, but more than just the ear, it was the visual thing on guitar. It's just seeing where you need to set your fingers at. Because I was already in band, so I could hear notes, but I didn't know where the notes were placed on the guitar. Because if anybody plays the guitar, you know that you can play an E in several different places on the neck. And when you listen to certain songs, you can basically hear what octave that E is in and which string that it's played on by the tone that's kind of reproduced. You have to be a musician to understand that. Maybe if you pick up a guitar, you'll know kind of similarly what I'm talking about. Bass people can pick that up just as well. But we had the solo Spanish Fly sitting up in there. I mentioned some good songs off that album. It was You're No Good. I really like the way he hits the high notes in that song and bounces back and forth between that and the rhythm. Somebody Get Me a Doctor. There's Dead or Alive. Dead or Alive is a really good song. It's one of my favorites off of that album. And Women in Love is another favorite song. Women in Love is another song that when I pick up the guitar now, I like to play the riff. I like to play the main riff in that song. It's kind of similar to Judgment Day, which is off the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. And it's similar to the same style of playing. Also a song called Pleasure Dome has a similar style to it, which we'll talk about later. But Women in Love was one of the songs of the intro. It was all tapping, and it was very light tapping. It was kind of a cleaned up sound. It wasn't so distorted. But hearing that for the first time, it was something that I tried to replicate over and over and never really could. To this day, I mean, I can play that song, but I can't give it the justice like Eddie gives it. So both really cool albums, Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2. We'll pick up a little bit later, go out by Women and Children First. Like I said, 1978 had an album, 79 we have an album, 1980 we have Women and Children First. Cradle Will Rock, just starting off in that song. The noise that Eddie makes on the guitar and the quotes or the little sayings that David Lee Roth incorporates in different songs. And if you've seen him live, you know what I'm talking about. He has this quirkiness about him, and he's quick tongue to say different things. And at the time, I used to work at a little restaurant, and some friends of mine, we knew the Van Halen catalog. And this little quote from David Lee Roth, we used to say it over and over because it was just a little funny part.
Have you seen Junior's grades?
I still laugh at that today when I hear that. Because right after that, Eddie goes into the solo, and it's bluesy solo. But it's just one of those that, when I played, it just kind of rolled off the fingers, and listening and playing, still developing the ear for the Van Halen sound. And when I'm buying these albums, I'm listening to them over and over and over. It's not like I'm repeating one song. I would listen to them over and over, and I would play along with them over and over until I got the songs right, and I would just let the tapes play out. And it's really a great time to sit in your bedroom, play your guitar, and have enough time to go from Van Halen 1 to 2, the Women and Children first, and then into Fair Warning, and we'll get to that one next. But mention a couple of more cool songs off of Women and Children first. From the Better Off Dead movie, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's Everybody Wants Some. And the little guy comes out and starts playing the Eddie Van Halen style guitar in the intro of the song. Check it out on YouTube if you hadn't seen it. Romeo's Delight is a really cool song. And we do have another solo spot by Eddie Van Halen. It's Tora Tora. It's a guitar solo, but it's a backwards guitar solo. So it's interesting to listen to. And then we have Take Your Whiskey Home. So really cool album. And to go and back that up, we have the Fair Warning album the next year in 1981. So as we know, the Fair Warning kicks off one of the meanest songs by Van Halen. It's called Mean Street. It's two-handed dancing on the guitar neck. And seeing Van Halen live, in Eddie's solo, he plays an excerpt of this song and a lot of two-handed antics up and down the fretboard, and he sets it on fire. But Fair Warning packs a hefty punch of songs. Open up with the Mean Street. Next we have Dirty Movies. You have Center Swing that comes up. Those are really three intense songs to be back to back. Unchained is off this album, and staying with the Van Halen style, we have a solo on this album. Now it's a keyboard solo. It's not a guitar solo. And as we talked about it at the beginning of the podcast, Eddie and the keyboards wants to play the keyboard. So this is one of the first songs I remember hearing, just in your face type of keyboard song. I know in Cradle Will Rock we have like a piano in the background, but it's not the main instrument. So the song is called Sunday Afternoon in the Park. This is a must listen. So if you never heard this, listen to it after the podcast is over. Go cue it up on YouTube, Spotify, whatever. Take a listen to the song. We have Unchained off of this album, but I've saved another one of my favorite songs for the end right here. And this is a song called Hear About It Later. And when I talk about my guitar playing and things just kind of rolling off the finger and just falling into place, it's this song, Hear About It Later. It's the solo in this song. When I heard it, I just listened to it. And it was one of those that just fell underneath my fingers and it just kind of rolled off. And it was just like, at the time, it was just like easy to play. And again, I'm going through these albums track by track, playing them as I go, getting everything underneath the fingers. And I'm going to play you an excerpt of that solo that I'm telling you about. There is so much fire in that solo. I mean, it's one of my favorites. It's also reminiscent of the plan that he done off For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. If you listen to the song Dream Is Over, there's a little bit of that type of playing in there. Again, guitar players, you know what I'm talking about. Van Halen fans, you got the ear, you know what I'm talking about. But That was 1981. Fair Warning. Kind of wrapping that up. We have these albums still coming in succession. We have Diver Down in 1982, and I have to go on record here and say that Diver Down is my least favorite Van Halen album, and I think it's kind of apparent if you listen to the tracks that are on the album, and just the discrepancies between Roth and Eddie and what direction that the band wants to take. It seems to be a struggle on the album. There's covers on the album. There's some good ones, and there's some ones that are, kind of okay in my terms. I'll listen to them if they're playing live or if they're on, but it's not one of those songs that I'm gonna just pick up and I've got to listen to that one. But the highlight tracks for me is, obviously Cathedral, another guitar solo. So we have Eddie with his solos on every one of these albums up to 1982. Cathedral is infamous. You'll hear Eddie play this in live concerts. Another one that grabs my attention is Intruder. Now, Intruder is like the same concept as Eruption was to You've Really Got Me. Intruder is like the intro to Pretty Woman. And, they kind of played it back to back, kept the tape running, and go straight into Pretty Woman. An interesting fact about Pretty Woman that the video to the song it's really out there. The first time I saw it, I questioned it, but MTV banned this video. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. I'm sure it's not banned on YouTube. Just go look it up, and it's very interesting. But moving on away from that, we have both the little guitars track. Eddie comes out with the small guitars and plays them. I think it's in a standard D tuning. So it's really nice to hear them play that live. I've seen them, in the live concerts on YouTube, playing little guitars and the intros and things. But that Diver Down, after that comes 1984. And that's when we see 5150 Studios, and I've told you that story. After that, it was 2 years between those albums, Diver Down in 1984. Now, Roth leaves the band. A couple more years go by. We get Sammy Hagar in the van. It's 1986. They come out with the 5150 album. Named after the studio. Of course, the history that it's a police code for crazy person, to be short with it. But to kick off the album, we have classic Sammy Hagar. And if you don't know, you're going to know now.
Hello, baby!
I mean, what better way than to kick off an album by Sammy Hagar, just all in your face? That's good enough. We got Why Can't This Be Love, Get Up, Dreams, Summer Nights, and I believe Summer Nights is one of the first songs that they jammed together or wrote together as a band. Flip it over to the beef side, we got Best of Both Worlds, Love Walks In, title track 5150, the last song on the album called Inside. Inside's a little very different from the rest of them in the style of writing that they done. But when I first heard that song, I knew it was different, and just the way the playing is on there, and you got the double stops, you got the octaves by Eddie Van Halen. It really, musically, it taught me some different things that I could do different than, the norm from what you were typically used to hearing on a lot of the rock and some of the metal albums. But I go back to Good Enough, because right after Sammy comes in. We have Eddie Van Halen, in your face guitar. Um, the harmonics, the tap harmonics that he's doing in there was the first time. And guitar players, you know what I'm talking about. The tap harmonics was something that I'd heard, but I didn't know how to do it. And like the chain of the 2 or 4 notes that he's putting together right there was really difficult for me to figure out. And it reminds me of another Van Halen song I'll talk about a little bit later. But it was one of those things where I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out and never could get it down. And finally, one day, I believe the tab came out to it, and I saw what he was doing. And even when I saw what he was doing and how to do it, it took me a while to get the finger placement down and to get the right sound to get the guitar to do what it needed to do. Because it's not a typical thing you can just play on any guitar and get that type of volume. And that goes into like the equipment that Eddie uses. If you've seen him play at some of the NOM shows and things like that, with specific settings that he likes to have, specific effects that he likes to have. Even though he's told people he doesn't play with effects, he really doesn't record with effects from what I'm told, but he does that in post. And he said that before, but we only know if it's true or not if somebody actually fills us in on some of those facts. Yeah. So they were kind of having 1986, 5150, great album. We get a couple of years between the albums, 1986 and then 1988. We have the follow up to 5150, which is OU812. And when you're as young as I was then, 2 years is a long time not to have a new Van Halen album come out when you were used to them, coming out year after year. And I was used to, playing through the Van Halen catalog so rapidly from Van Halen 1 all the way up to 1984. So, it's a little bit different, a little bit of time lapse in between there. And something that we failed to hear on the 1984 and the 5150 album and the OU182 album is the guitar solos, guitar solo spots, or even the keyboard spots in the albums. So they were, it was different stage for them that they were going through, or just maybe it's just a different, preference. But 1988, we have when it's love. We have AFU, Naturally Wired. We get Cobble Wobble, and anybody knows Sammy Hagar likes his tequila. Cabo San Lucas. They're doing the club thing down there, and they're playing at the club. So Cabo Wobble was, a tribute to that. We have Source of Infection, Black and Blue, one of my favorites off that album. Sucker in a 3-piece. And as we know, we have a bonus track, and it's Apolitical Blues. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the time when CDs started coming out, and that's why we get the bonus track of Apolitical Blues. It wasn't on every album that I know of anyway. So we don't really see that. I think we see it on the CD. And it's a really great album. Like, to me, Black and Blue is the only one that kind of stands out, and to me it's just because, and it's going back to the octaves, the double stop type of playing that he's doing, same as what he done on the song The Inside. I really like that style that he used because it taught me that you can make hit songs, you can make interesting songs with movements of double stops. I always don't have to incorporate that fifth. I always don't have to hit that power chord to give the song depth or to give the song, its integrity. So we 1988 hits. That album's done. We don't get another album again until 1991. And what do we get in 1991? We get a digital album. So I remember buying this. I think I bought it on the first or second day it came out. I was excited to read about it in the guitar magazines. They were really talking it up. They were talking about you can really hear the bass guitar in this album or this CD at the time. And I didn't have a CD player then. I don't had the cassettes. I believe CDs were still in the realm of like $22 to $26 or something like that. Something that was, at the time it was out of my price range. But I go out to the store, I grab the cassette tape, I believe maybe $10.99, $11.99 or something like that. And I'm stoked. I put the album on. First track off the album is Pound Cake. Now, this is like my dilemma that I had in Good Enough back on the 5150 album is how the heck is he playing that? Take a listen. I heard that and I was perplexed. Of course, I let the tape play, but when I first heard it, I had not a clue what was going on. After I finished listening to the whole album, I had to go back and I picked up the guitar. And what did I do? I tried to recreate that. And I just about had it down, but something wasn't quite right. And I kept searching. And, at the time we didn't have internet. We didn't have a resource to go to. I couldn't just go to the library and find out how he was doing things. So some time went by and I had to search through guitar magazines for interviews to figure out some things. I finally figured out, I can't remember which magazine I finally found it in, but I realized he was using a power drill, kind of similar to what Paul Gilbert done. So he wasn't, like picking the strings, but he was using a cordless power drill, and it would, you get the feedback through the pickups, and that drill played it's naturally, the tone that it played was a B, and the fifth string on the guitar is a B string, so I kept pulling off that string trying to recreate that sound, and it just, at the time it blew me away till I figured it out, and I'm like, well, that's simple. And the video came out and you could see him doing it in the video, and it was, things, a little, kind of a thing people would kind of pick up and kind of use it in their performances and try and recreate those sounds with the power drill. But it was just funny how, some would turn it into a gimmick. But I mean, that's Eddie Van Halen for you. And I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, he said in the interview, it was just one of those things where a drill was sitting around in the studio and they just kind of, just kind of mess it around and come up with that. But going on, for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, it was an album where Sammy wanted to make a statement about censorship, because at the time, he says around that, like, 2 Live Crew and some people around there, and I know Tipper Gore was big on censorship, and this was kind of before the warning labels went on to albums, so that's how the album got its title. He didn't want to use the acronym. He wanted to make a statement on the censorship and just, in your face type of thing to people, but they couldn't figure out how to pull it off. So, I think he says he was working out with Ray Boom Boom Mancini, and he told him the acronym for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and it was a punishment that they would give people for when they, like, were unfaithful to their spouse or, doing carnal things. So they would give them certain punishment. And I kind of looked up the punishment and try to get some history on it. And the only thing I get on it that is like what they call pillory back then is like a device where they put your head and your hands in. They kind of put you on display out in the town square. And that offense that they were committing was a carnal knowledge offense. So that's kind of how the acronym got started. Some say that's not an exact true story, but who knows what the truth is? But that's where the album got its name. We know that's where the truth is of how the album got its name. So we get Pound Cake, we get Judgment Day, incredible song. It incorporates two-handed tapping, solo sections, and the outro solo. It's really intense. One of my favorites. We go on to a song called Spanked, Run Around. Run Around's E flat. You get Pleasure Dome, and if you've seen Van Halen live with Sammy, you've seen him do Pleasure Dome. Now to me it's one of the different songs that's off the album. It kind of stands out. But when I saw him live in concert, they played pretty much like the mid section of Pleasure Dome and the solo section. Eddie incorporates his solo in there, and they go into another song after that. So we don't get to, I didn't get to see him play the whole song like I wanted to. And depending on if you have a CD or a cassette, we get the flip side. We get In and Out, Man on a Mission, Dream is Over. To me, Dream is Over is one of them, highly regarded by me. It reminds me of the Led Zeppelin at the time. And I forget the producers on the album and which ones, but I think Sammy had said that's one of the sounds they were really trying to recreate on the album was like that Zeppelin type of sound. And all these songs, they're right about it being a digital album because the bass is really heavy in the song. It's almost, it's almost overbearing in a lot of the songs. You really know the bass is in your face. Not to get a rhyme going or anything. But we got the Dreams Over. We have the famous song Right Now. Most people know that song. They've heard it. One of the songs that Sammy really wanted to make a statement with. One of the songs that kind of came to him. And they made it a hit. It's a really intense song when you see them play it live because they switch it up a lot at the end. And finally, we get a solo from Eddie Van Halen in 1991. We get 316, which I believe I've heard him play this before, but I don't think that little, the tune had a name, the riff had a name, but he named it 316. It's named after his son Wolfgang, which was born on March 16th. Hence, that's where they get 316 from. Now that's one of the things that Van Halen done that's kind of important to me, and we can go back to hear about it later. The song I played for you earlier, the solo in that, when you hear the cowbell before the solo, that cowbell before the solo, and 316, dedicating that to his son. That's a couple of the things that influenced me for when I made my albums. Is I carried that through and kind of carried that theme. I made a song for my son. I put it on my first CD because I thought that was a pretty neat thing to do. And the reason I bring up the cowbell thing is another thing I incorporated into a few of my songs off the first CD. Is just having that rhythm going. It taught me that you don't have to fill the spectrum up with sound all the time, that you can break it down and you can use the silence. You can use just the drum and play against the drum, which kind of like highlights your guitar even more, but also gives it the space to breathe when you need to. So those dynamics had influence over me, and some things I still do today. And we wrap up that album with Top of the World. And if you heard Top of the World and you heard the song Jump, the intro, The Top of the World, is the outro to Jump. So when you listen to Jump next time on the fade out, turn it up, and you'll hear Eddie playing Top of the World. So little relation there, and those are some things that I picked up on through those albums and through the years. But yeah, to me, 1991 and that album kind of ended the reign for me for Van Halen, because by the time we leave 1991, we don't get another album until 1995. When we get the album in 1995, but there was a lot of fighting going on in the band between Sammy and the brothers. I believe that album, if I'm not mistaken, it took them a year to put that all together. But like any other time, 4 years was a long time to wait for another Van Halen album. Some of the music had changed during those years. Now, Balance, when they come out with it, was still a powerful album. But to me, it didn't have it just didn't have the star quality at that time when it came out like the other albums did. Not to me. It wasn't until probably about almost 10 years later that I picked that album back up and start listening to those songs more and appreciating those songs and, the different songs they have on the album. But like Seventh Seal, really like that song. Can't Stop Loving You. That's really a favorite of mine. Don't Tell Me is really an intense song, especially if you watch the video. Watch the video with the long version. Amsterdam is a cool song. Aftershock is another cool one. A lot of cool playing, and just to me, it seems like this is one of the darker albums, and the playing that you get from Eddie is a little bit darker because somewhere between Carnal Knowledge album and Balance, and I remember seeing Carnal Knowledge tour. He was playing with the Sustainer guitar a lot. He'd had the new Wolfgang guitars made, and I'd heard he had smashed some in concert, and he went through 3 different series of guitars from Music Mans to PVs with the Wolfgang. But the playing had changed, and he got into some trans trim type of stuff and incorporating those on the Wolfgang guitar, which you really don't. I didn't see it emerge until Van Halen 3. But you had the instrumental off of Balance, the Bachelortorium, however you say it, and Feeling, and that song had a bonus track called Crossing Over. I'm not sure of the details on Crossing Over and where it was released, if it was USA or if it was all over the world or just in certain countries. But and that's kind of the thing about doing this podcast. It's not a podcast that I'm trying to like regurgitate different types of facts. I'm doing the ones that really catch my eye, catch my ear, the things that my relationship to Van Halen. So if I leave some things out that you just were thirsty to hear about, I'm sorry. I'm trying to, this is kind of my relationship here. But 1985 or 1995, we have the Balance album, and we have the breaking up of the band after the fighting went on, and we have Gary Sharon that comes up and takes Sammy Hagar's place. And there's 3 years that pass before we get a Van Halen album, and it's called Van Halen 3. You seen the album? It's got the dude taking the cannonball on the front. Now, Van Halen 3, if you know the history of Eddie and kind of the band, I think this is one of more his really still in his darker phases. Because I know the time I saw him in Little Rock, I know he was in his darker phase because the way he handled his guitar, some of the things that he said, in the show and some of the ways that he acted and some things he chose not to play. It was a very different time, to watch him. I'd seen him in what we call Alltel Arena, I think at that time. And before that, I'd seen him in Barton Coliseum back in the it was still in, I think it was 1991 when I saw him then. It was years later. I think it was on the Balance tour when I saw him and when it was Alltel. But you could tell there was a difference between the two Eddies that you saw there as far as the playing and expression. And if you've seen the live videos that they produced, you can tell a difference from when he had his first, his Kramers, his striped guitars, to the PV, the Wolfgang guitars. But name a few songs I didn't really follow too much after Balance, but I since revisited Van Halen 3. Songs like Fire in the Hole, that's pretty much the only song that kind of stands out to me on the album, because I didn't go and just like listen to that one as intensely as the way I've done the others. But what I meant by revisiting, I went back and watched some of the live shows with Gary Sharon. And what's interesting about the songs that they play, I'm used to hearing Van Halen in a standard tuning. I'm used to hearing certain songs in an E flat tuning. The songs that they play live are all in flat. They're not standard tunings. They're all E flat songs. And there's some that are tuned down even below that. So it tells me something about Sharon's voice. It was easier for them to tune down and him to sing over. So you get to hear songs like off of 5150. You get to hear some of those songs played in E flat. They're not played in the standard tunings that you're accustomed to hearing. If you're not musician, you may not quite understand that part of just the notes that are being produced. It's also a time under Gary Sharon when they went on the Howard Stern show, and it's also on YouTube. It's an interesting watch. Eddie brings in a guitar. He spends a lot of time setting up an amp, setting up a guitar, playing the guitar. But what he's actually doing is he's breaking in the guitar, and at the end of the show, he signs it and he gives it to Howard Stern over the top of the desk. So it's one of the things that Eddie would do, giving gifts like that and making sure that the guitar is broken in and that he played it. It's just not something he took out of a box and didn't use and just kind of handed it off. I thought it was really nice of him to kind of give him that gift. And it's something that's, kind of immortalized, especially now after his passing. But 1998 told that story. It's not until 2012 that we get another album from Van Halen, with the exception of a couple of greatest hits albums. Really won't go into those because they're kind of rehashing out songs. But 2012, we have A Different Kind of Truth, and it's from David Lee Roth. I mean, he's singing on that album. So we have Roth that comes back. All through this time, these years, we get more tours. We get more tours from Sammy. We get more tours with Dave. And also we have Michael Anthony doesn't exactly step aside, but Wolfgang, Eddie's son, comes up and takes over bass. He's on this album, and he's also the touring bass player. But it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Eddie had preferences, and I'm sure when, while he's maturing as an artist and the band's maturing, he has ideas. The band is named after him and his brother. And it's almost kind of like a natural thing for him to have a son and to want to want to play side by side with his son, because it's called Van Halen. So you have 3/4 of the band is Van Halen on stage. Some people criticize him, for kind of having Michael Anthony step off to the side, but that's the original lineup that we know it. There was another bass player before Michael, but as we know, most of these albums we get Michael Anthony, so most people want to see Michael Anthony as the bass player. I don't mind seeing Wolfgang step up and play bass. I can understand where he's coming from. If I had my son and he was a musician, who's to say I wouldn't, and I don't have that dream for my band to have family on stage, touring, playing all the Van Halen songs, in front of people. You putting your stamp in history. But, this to me, it's a trip down memory lane just to even talk about a lot of this stuff, because it's things that I grew up with that, you just don't have this kind of conversation with your friends all the time about, what impact an artist or what impact a band had on you. It's more or less, a 5-minute or 2-minute discussion. If anything, you're talking about your favorite song at one point, but to go into it at this depth is it's different. But, this podcast is for the people that know me as a guitar player. It's also for people that know Van Halen. It's for people that know Eddie Van Halen and had their own relationship, and what the band and what he meant to you. Because it's different for different people. But I hope I just spoke about some things that kind of maybe you'll go look up or sparked your interest to go revisit some of the albums, maybe some of the greatest hits, maybe some of the live shows that are all over YouTube. And it's something that I noticed before he passed away was I opened up YouTube one day and it's just flooded with live concert footage of old Van Halen. It's their Diver Down concerts on there. There's concerts from Fair Warning tours, but a lot of good stuff and a lot of good music. Go look up you some Van Halen. If you're not a Van Halen fan, if you just happen to run across this right now, make that your mission to go out and listen to some songs. And if you're a musician, go on a discovery with some of these songs and, compare them to each other, compare the sounds, just kind of pick them apart, kind of indulge yourself in them, because it's part of history and it'll never be changed. And for everybody that made it this far in the podcast, I appreciate you listening. Share, subscribe, like the podcast. I'll be having some guests on in the future. Hoping we're on the backside of this COVID thing and getting out of it. I know I've been away from the gym for 8 or 9 months. It seems like an eternity. I could come on here and do podcasts about COVID, but everybody's sick of hearing about that. You don't need to have that forced down your throat anymore. So I'm Chris Thompson. Appreciate you listening. This is the Mega Talks podcast.